There is a fence on my property that stood for 25 years. Not a single board rotted. Not one post went soft. A windstorm finally knocked it down. 3 trees came across it in one blow, and when I pulled the boards apart, the wood underneath was still sound, still hard, still dry, and the thing that protected it for a quarter century cost me exactly $0. But that is not the part that is going to surprise you. The part that is going to surprise you is the 4th method I am going to show you today, because it sounds like the most reckless thing a person could do to a piece of wood. You take a torch to it, you set it on fire, and somehow that fire is the reason the wood can last 80 to 100 years without a single coat of anything. The Japanese have been doing it since the 1700s. Stay with me through all 4 methods, because I saved the one that changes everything for last. My name is Samuel. I was raised Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and I still work the same ground my family has worked for generations. I have built every fence, every deck, every raised bed on this homestead with my own hands, and I have not bought a can of deck stain in over 15 years. That is not because I am cheap, it is because I was taught something better. Now, here is the problem nobody talks about. If you built a deck or a fence before the year 2004, you probably got lucky. Your pressure-treated lumber had something in it called CCA, chromated copper arsenate. It had been used in wood treatment since the 1940s, and it worked. Decks built with that old CCA lumber lasted 30-40 years without a whisper of rot. I have got relatives with decking from '99 that is still in solid shape today. But on December 31, 2003, the manufacturers pulled CCA out of residential lumber voluntarily. The EPA had grown concerned about the arsenic, a known carcinogen, leaching into soil where children played. They replaced it with something called ACQ, alkaline copper quaternary. It is safer, I will grant that, but it does not hold up the same way, not even close. So if you built your deck after 2004, you are living on borrowed time unless you did something extra to protect that wood. And most people did not. They trusted the green tint on the lumber and figured that was enough. It was not. That is the gap these 4 methods fill. And the first one is the oldest farmer's trick I know. Now here is the trick, and it starts with something you have probably been throwing away, or rather, something your mechanic has been throwing away for you. Use motor oil. I know. I can already hear the doubt. But let me tell you where I learned this, because it matters. When I was young, I do not think I was a teenager yet. My father liked to drive through the countryside on Saturday afternoons, visit old farms that had ceased to operate decades earlier. The houses were sometimes gone, the people were long gone, but the fencing was still standing, and a lot of times the barns were still there, gray and leaning a little, but solid. I remember asking my father how a barn could still be standing after the better part of a century with nobody to tend it. He pulled the truck over, walked me up to one, and ran his hand along the boards. They were dark, almost black in places. He said those farmers could not afford commercial stains. Most of those barns were built before commercial stains even existed. So they used what they had on hand, motor oil, diesel fuel, or a mix of both. They brushed it onto the wood with whatever rag or can they had, and the wood lasted longer than the men who built the barn. My grandfather said much the same thing years later. He said a frugal man wastes nothing, not even the oil that comes out of an engine. That stuck with me deeper than any hardware store advice ever could. Here is why it works at the basic level. Wood under a microscope looks less like a solid block and more like a bundle of hollow tubes. Those tubes are full of hydroxyl groups, tiny molecular hooks that grab onto water. Motor oil is hydrophobic, it repels water. When dry wood absorbs oil, those hydrocarbon chains physically block water from reaching the cellulose fibers inside. No water means no moisture. No moisture means the fungi and mold that cause rot cannot get a foothold. A research team out of Russia published a study in the journal Forests in 2021 confirming exactly this. Wood impregnated with used engine oil showed significantly improved hydrophobic properties and biological resistance compared to untreated wood. This is not folklore. The science backs it up. Now, here is how you actually do it. You want your wood bone dry. Do this after a stretch of sunny days, not after a rain. You can get used motor oil for free from any oil change shop. I get mine every time I change the oil on my 3 vehicles. Most of those shops are happy to hand it over. They actually have to pay to dispose of it. The last fellow I spoke with gave me 10 gallons without blinking. For a fence or a deck surface that people will see, you want to brush it on with a stain brush, not spray it. Take your time, spread it even. For underneath a deck or places nobody will look at, a pump sprayer works fine. Just wear a respirator and lay a tarp below to catch drip. Now the color. Straight used motor oil goes on dark. Think of a rich, deep walnut. If that is too dark for your taste, here is what I do. Mix it 50-50 with diesel fuel. Diesel lightens the color considerably, gives you something closer to a natural wood tone. Still penetrates, still protects, but it does not look like you painted your fence with tar. Here's a little trick most folks do not know. Used transmission fluid has a reddish tinge to it. If you can get your hands on some, you can get a stain color that leans toward a warm cedar red, not fire engine red, more like aged cherry. Do a test patch on a scrap board, let it sit in the sun for a day and see if you like the tone before you commit. The wood will absorb it fully in 5 to 7 days in warm weather and will not be sticky or slippery once cured. But before this next part, I want to make something clear about the posts. This is where most people lose their fences and their decks, and it is the one thing nobody does right. The post is the foundation of everything. If the post rots, the whole structure fails, and the post rots first because it sits in the ground surrounded by moisture 24 hours a day. Here is what I do. Before a post goes in the ground, I fill a 7-gallon bucket about halfway with motor oil or the oil diesel mix, and I stand 3 or 4 posts upright in that bucket. I submerge them to about 2 feet, which is how deep they are going into the ground, and I let them soak overnight. Sometimes I leave them for 2 or 3 days. The dry wood drinks that oil like it is thirsty. When you pull them out, that bottom section is saturated. And the rot, the fungus, the insects that live in the soil, they cannot touch it. And before someone asks, synthetic motor oil works just as well as conventional. Both contain the hydrocarbon base that does the work. Use whatever you have. Then when you set the post, pour your dry concrete into the hole, create a bowl shape around the post, and add water slowly to let the concrete absorb it. But here is the second step most people skip. Mound a secondary pile of concrete on top, shaped like a little dome, so water sheds away from the post instead of pooling against it. Water runs off instead of sitting. That one detail will add years to the life of every post you set. Now, the second method is something I picked up from looking at fences in Japan, and if you have followed along with some of my other work, you know I am a firm believer that the best ideas do not care what country they come from. If you have ever seen photographs of old Japanese estates, some going back centuries, you will notice something on their fences and garden walls. They have a roof, a small one, just a cap of boards running horizontally along the top, angled so rain slides off. Simple as can be. I do the same thing with dog-ear fence boards laid flat on top as a rain shield. It keeps water from soaking into the end grain of every vertical board, which is the single fastest way wood absorbs moisture. End grain is like a bundle of open straws pointing straight up at the sky. Cap it and you cut your moisture intake dramatically. Between the oil treatment and that cap, the fence I lost to the windstorm had 0 rot at 25 years. 0. And that brings us to the railroad ties. You have probably seen them. Those thick, dark beams under every rail line in the country. They are treated with creosote, a coal tar distillate that has been in use since the 1870s. According to the Railroad Tie Association, the average service life of a creosote-treated tie is 33 to 42 years, and some last past 50. That is impressive. But creosote is classified as hazardous by the EPA. It contains the same polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons I mentioned. You cannot buy it at the hardware store. You are not supposed to use it at home. I mention it only because it proves the principle. Oil-based penetration into wood fibers is the single most effective preservation method known. The question is what oil you use and whether the trade-offs make sense for your situation. Now, the fourth method, and I saved this one for last because it is the one nobody believes until they understand the science behind it. But first I have to be honest with you about something, and I will not skip it because it matters. Used motor oil is not without risk. It contains trace amounts of heavy metals, lead, cadmium, chromium, and compounds called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are formed during engine combustion. These are real concerns. Do not use this anywhere near a vegetable garden, not on the outside of raised beds, not on a children's play structure, not anywhere food or small hands will touch it regularly. I line my own raised beds with pond liner, the kind rated for 30 to 40 years, so the soil never contacts the wood at all. If you want a true EPA-registered wood preservative you can brush on yourself, copper naphthenate is the one to look at. You will find it at most building supply stores. Copper Green is one common brand, runs about $40 a gallon, and it is rated for ground contact wood. It is the same class of preservative used on utility poles. And here is the honest part that cost me a little hype. Motor oil is not a fungicide. It does not kill rot organisms the way a copper-based preservative does. What it does is create a water barrier. In a dry climate with modest rainfall, that barrier holds up beautifully. 5 to 7 years between applications, sometimes longer. In a humid climate with heavy rain, that barrier wears down faster. You might need to reapply every 3 to 4 years in the Deep South. I would rather you trust me than be impressed by me. It is a free treatment. It works, but it is not magic, and I want you to know exactly what it can and cannot do. Now, the fourth method, this one comes from 18th century Japan, and it is called Shou Sugi Ban, or Yakisugi in the original Japanese. Here's what they figured out over 300 years ago. If you take a piece of wood, traditionally Japanese cedar, and you burn the surface with controlled flame until you get a deep char layer, roughly 1 to 2 millimeters thick, something remarkable happens. The fire burns off the hemicellulose in the outer wood cells. Hemicellulose is the sugar-rich part of wood, the part that fungi feed on. Burn it away, and you leave behind a layer of pure carbon. That carbon layer does 4 things at once. It is hydrophobic. Water beads up and rolls off. It is naturally resistant to insects. Termites and carpenter ants cannot digest carbon. It blocks ultraviolet light completely. UV is what breaks down lignin and turns wood gray and brittle. And here is the part that sounds like a riddle. The charred layer is actually more resistant to fire than untreated wood. You burn it to fireproof it. The Japanese use this on homes, fences, temple gates, and outbuildings. In Japan, properly charred wood siding has been documented lasting over 100 years. Modern builders have measured the erosion rate, and depending on orientation and weather, the structural wood underneath the char layer does not wear thin enough to fail for 80 to 100 years. Sometimes longer with periodic oiling every 10 to 15 years. And here's the thing, you do not need Japanese cedar. You can do this with pine, cedar, Douglas fir, cypress. A propane torch, the kind you can pick up at any hardware store for about $30, or the one you probably already own for sweating copper pipes or burning weeds, is all you need. You want a deep, even alligator skin char, not a light toast. You are looking for black crack like the skin of a charred marshmallow. Move the flame slow and steady, about 3 to 4 inches from the surface. You will hear the wood crackle and see the grain rise into ridges. That is exactly what you want. Then you brush off the loose soot with a stiff nylon bristle brush, not a wire brush, which will gouge the char layer, and seal the whole thing with a coat of boiled linseed oil. Now here's where people make the wrong purchase. You want boiled linseed oil, not raw. Raw linseed oil can take weeks to dry and will stay tacky long enough to collect every bit of dust and pollen in your yard. Boiled linseed oil cures in 12 to 18 hours. You will find it in the paint aisle, usually on the bottom shelf near the mineral spirits. A quart runs about $8. 1 coat, that is it. The charred wood drinks the oil in, the oil locks the carbon layer in place, and you have a piece of wood that will outlast your house. Now, one word of caution with the torch. You are working with open flame on dry wood, have a garden hose uncoiled and pressurized nearby. Work on a clear surface away from dry grass and leaves, and do not do this on a windy day. Common sense, but it bears saying plainly. And now think about what you just heard. A 5-gallon bucket of deck stain at Home Depot runs between $200 and $230. Bear Olympic. Pick the brand. You are supposed to reapply that every 2 to 3 years. Over 20 years, that is 7 or 8 applications. You do the math. That is $1,400 to close to $2,000 just in stain for 1 deck. A propane torch you already own. Boiled linseed oil for $8. used motor oil for free. That is the whole comparison laid bare. Now I want to take a moment because this is the part that matters, and it is bigger than a fence or a deck. In 2003, they pulled the arsenic out of pressure treated lumber. They had good reason, but they did not replace it with something equally durable for the homeowner. What they replaced it with is wood that rots faster and costs the same. And the solution the industry offers you is to buy their stain, their sealer, their premium composite boards that run $5 to $16 a square foot just for material. A 300 square foot composite deck installed can cost $10,000 to $21,000. That is the direction they want you going. More product, more cost, more dependence. But a man who knows 4 ways to preserve his own wood with oil that costs nothing, with a cap board that takes 10 minutes, with a soaking bucket and a bag of concrete, and with a 300-year-old Japanese fire technique, that man does not need the stain aisle. He does not need the composite catalog. He does not need anyone's permission to keep his own home standing. Nobody can sell you a monthly bill for a propane flame and a bucket of free oil. That is the whole of it. If this kind of plain, say practical knowledge is what you have been looking for, the kind they do not teach at the hardware store because there is no profit in it, then do a neighbor a kindness and follow along. There is a good deal more where this came from, and I am just getting started. So here's what I want you to do this week. First, call your oil change shop. Ask them to save you 5 to 10 gallons of used motor oil next time they have it. That is free. Second, pick up a quart of boiled linseed oil, about $8 at any hardware store. Third, if you are building new fence posts or setting deck posts, get a 7-gallon bucket and soak those posts for at least overnight before they go in the ground. Fourth, take a scrap piece of lumber, hit it with your propane torch until you get that deep alligator char, brush it off, oil it, and see it for yourself. Feel the surface, see how the water beads. That small test will tell you more than anything I can say. Total cost for everything, $8 and change, plus what you already own. Tell me in the comments what kind of wood you are working with, pine, cedar, redwood, something else, and which method you are going to try first. And if you have an old fence or deck that was treated before 2003 with that old CCA lumber, I want to hear how it is holding up, because those reports from your own yards are how all of us learn what really works, and I read every one. Next time, I am going to show you something that follows straight on from this, how to build a raised garden bed that will never rot, using a method that does not involve a single chemical touching your soil. It costs less than you would believe, and it lasts longer than you would guess. Until then, keep your posts dry, keep your wood fed, keep your torch steady, and remember, the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.